All right, welcome back, and make sure you are subscribed to the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, JAKIB Media, so you don't miss any of the conversations with our next guest, NFL Eagles insider John McMullen. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Birds 365, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., Philly Voice and SI.com. All right, let's bring John into the convo now and have some fun to wrap up the week on a Friday. Johnny Mac, how we doing, man?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
Doing well. So before we get into the NFL draft, although this does have something to do with it, and the Eagles in particular, your thoughts on Kansas City trading its first-round pick to the Baltimore Ravens for Pro Bowl offensive tackle Orlando Brown?
Yeah, I like it. I talk all the time, and, it doesn't surprise me, obviously. Andy Reid, a very smart organization. There was a little panic you saw at the end of last season, and really probably why Tampa Bay is the Super Bowl champions and Kansas City isn't, is because Eric Fisher got hurt in the championship game. Mitchell Schwartz got hurt midway through the season, and their offensive line was kind of a shambles by the time the Super Bowl ran around. So, people were concerned, and you saw how ordinary Patrick Mahomes looked behind that offensive line. And they went out and got not only Orlando Brown today, but in free agency, so Joe Thuney. So, look, they know what you need up front, and that's the foundation for everything else. And that's what I've been talking about with the Eagles. The Eagles know that as well. The key is executing.
Yeah, well, executing both on the field and with their draft
the key
picks.
is executing the plan. That's what I meant. But
right.
Yeah, obviously on the field as well.
Yeah, but exactly. But I'm saying that because offensive line is the key to everything. You're not going to be able to execute if you don't have the right offensive line.
Yeah, and Jody Mack and I got into it on Birds 365 today because he's a big Devontae Smith fan, which I think he's a very good player. It's not about him being a bad player. I think it's ironic because, so many Eagles fans wring their hands over last season. We've been over it time and time again, Justin Jefferson versus Jalen Reagor. And forget the fact that, he wouldn't have had the high-volume quarterback here. He wouldn't have had the remember, the Vikings also have a really good receiver in Adam Thielen, so basically the first half of the season never saw a double team. The Eagles wouldn't have had that, so he wouldn't have had that advantage. But then you get down to the bottom line. The guy had an historic rookie season, historic to the point where he broke all of Randy Moss's records. Randy Moss. And, okay, so people are getting really upset and saying how good he is, which is true. He is. How many games they win? I believe it was 7. Yeah. They were a playoff team. They went to a team that was under 500. Now, that had nothing to do with Justin Jefferson. My only point is there's only so much impact a receiver can have on the game. There's too many. They need a vehicle to get them the football. I talk about it all the time. They're just not. We had Blake Bedingfield on, the former college scouting director with the Titans. He said quarterback, what I tell fans all the time, quarterback, edge rusher, left tackle. I would throw in right tackle now in the modern football. Those are the 3 most important positions in professional football. And number 4 ain't close, to be honest.
Yeah, and, I said to you this week that, a month or 2 ago, I wanted the Eagles to get a Devontae Smith or a weapon on offense, and I've changed my tune on that completely. I've done a complete 180. But just for the sake of this convo for another minute or two, it is it's tough. It's a double-edged sword, however you want to describe it, because you have to ask yourself this. Is there a wide receiver that will be available when we're about to pick that we feel like is a really good prospect and has the potential to be a legitimate number 1 or 2 option in the NFL? And if that answer is yes, then I do understand the argument for people out there saying go and get a wide receiver, don't you?
Yes and no. I mean, I think what puts it, the only thing that puts it in the equation for me, and the only thing is the year. It's not a typical year in the fact that you don't have a lot of defensive linemen, number one, who belong in the top 15. The offensive linemen who belong in the top 15 are top 10 guys are going to be gone most likely, and Sewell and Slater. And then you have to sort of process the Barrett Tuckers of the world and the Christian Darasols of the world. Are they worthy of going there? So it's not as strong as a draft as it is typically in the normal year. If you had a strong defensive line class, if you had a strong offensive line class at the top of the draft, I wouldn't even hesitate. The only reason I'm hesitating is because it's a weak draft at the more important positions, and that's the only reason I entertain it. Because look, I think you could say, yeah, I think Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle. I think one of the two is going to be there, and the minute, if the Eagles select either, the minute they stepped into Philadelphia, they'd be the best receiver on this team. So let's stipulate that right off the bat. Again, what are they going to accomplish with a second-year quarterback who's, again, people can make fun of Kirk Cousins. They often do. Well, you're talking about a guy who rolls up. If he's got a 4,000-yard season, that's probably a bad year for him. And he's been doing that since Washington. I mean, that's a guy with significant arm talent to get the football down the field. That's not necessarily the strength of Jalen Hurts. His strength is more the modern dual-threat quarterback who's not going to just stand from the pocket and sling it downfield. So you're not going to have a 1,400-yard receiver. So right off the bat, there's going to be disappointment. And it might not even be the fault of the receiver himself, because he's just not in an offense that's designed to pile up significant passing yards. So it's kind of built in, that disappointment. And then who knows? It could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. People are expecting, Devontae Smith won the Heisman Trophy. He's graded higher than Justin Jefferson, so he should be better than Justin Jefferson. Guess what? It's not going to happen. So right off the bat, there's so many pitfalls to it that don't even involve the actual football aspect of it. If I'm the Eagles, I'm steering way clear of the wide receivers, way clear. That's where I am as we head into draft week.
Yeah, and, I think there's evidence that the organization agrees with you, John, that they would rather take the stability in the NFL draft because there's even unknown in the stable options, and that typically is what, the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, and those are very important areas, but they trade back, they get value, they, acquire assets, and that tips their hat, I think, in our minds here, John, that they're going to go that direction. I think barring anything crazy, we've just been trying to figure out what is that crazy thing that could maybe sway them, if anything.
Yeah, I think the thing that could sway them is if they think a player has a chance to be a true superstar. We talked yesterday on the show also about the scheme and the fit. I mean, there would be some redundancy when you talk about Smith or Waddle and Jalen Reagor, and they're not prepared to give up on Jalen Reagor. So, what are you going to do in that instance? You can get them both on the field, play one in the slot, play one as the Z, and then you got to figure out if you're going to throw Fulgham out there or JJ. I guess the biggest point for me is there's so many holes on this team. You can't just keep drafting one position. Like, I understand the frustration in that JJ hasn't panned out. Jalen Reagor didn't have the greatest rookie season. But in the case of Reagor, I think most of it has to do with injuries. So I think you still have to have hope there, and the Eagles do. So, and then the second point is, you bring in a head coach who's got a lot of experience with the receiver position, and we've talked about player development. How about developing these players as well? How about making the players you do have better? I think that's a big part of this equation. And again, you look all over this roster, and they need players at almost every position. So you can't just be, put the blinders on and say, let's fix receiver and let's not stop until we fix it, because then you wake up and you got all these issues all over the place and you've ignored other positions. So everything points to me like they don't want to go receiver again.
Do you think they've already, in the past, just based off of how many receivers they have drafted and invested in, that they already went too far and that's part of it? It's just like, okay, enough's enough given the past 2, 3, 4 drafts.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Unfortunately, ego does come into the equation, and you don't want to say, people will make the argument that, and I've made the argument, so, if you make a mistake, the best path forward is to admit that mistake, and in a lot of ways, the Eagles did that with Carson Wentz, and then just move forward. But I don't think they're prepared to say Jalen Reagor's a mistake. They might be prepared to say JJ is, but I think will get in at least one more opportunity with the new coaching staff, new set of eyes looking at him. So do they want two Z receivers? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it just comes down to, like modern basketball. We used to say, point guard, shooting guard, power forward, small forward, center. It doesn't exist anymore. It's all positionless. Maybe you just go that route and just stick the best players on the field and say, okay, let's figure it out. And if Jalen Hurts needs to convert a 3rd and 7, you just don't have the back shoulder or the contested catch in the playbook because you don't have the player that can do that.
Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider. We do this every weeknight on The Fix at 7:30. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. All right, I want to talk some just bigger picture NFL draft storylines, and everything relates to the Eagles, really. But number 3 overall, John, that is a big storyline to me. Mac Jones is being linked towards the 49ers, and then you hear people say, well, I don't know. It seems like it's Justin Fields, and then his epilepsy, is that going to be a factor? What about Trey Lance as a wild card at 3? So I think those 3 quarterbacks with the 3rd overall pick is probably the number 1 storyline. And then right behind it, Kyle Pitts and where he potentially ends up. So chime in on those 2 big stories there.
Yeah, I think the 49ers are going to take Mac Jones. That's the guy they were focused on. And, we get to the point where it becomes, a little paralysis by analysis. I don't think necessarily it's wavered inside their building, as opposed to people claiming it's wavering outside the building. I just look at Kyle Shanahan in his history, and he's had success with different type quarterbacks. He had success, I mentioned before, with RG3 as a rookie. But, I think in a lot of ways that's his sort of tipping point, because he's right there with Andy Reid, probably is regarded as the best offensive coach in football. Maybe throw Sean McVay in there as well. And, he can scheme up a lot of things. And as I said, he's had success with different types of quarterbacks. But he also understands he had 1 year with RG3, and it was a really successful year, and then he got hurt, and it was over. And I think he sees the shelf life of Matt Ryan. He sees the shelf life of Kirk Cousins. He sees the shelf life of who we had in Washington. He sees the shelf life of obviously Tom Brady and Drew Brees, who just retired, and Phillip Rivers. If you hit on that type of quarterback, you got a quarterback for 15 years. And I think that's what he's shooting for, and that's what he thinks he will get with Mac Jones. You could agree with it. You could disagree with it. Most people would grade Justin Fields higher, certainly from a ceiling standpoint. I think Fields and Lance are higher, but he'd rather have a quarterback that's going to be there for 10 years and not a shooting star who might be really good for 4 or 5 years and then flame out because of injury and getting banged up and that type of thing.
All right, so let's say the 49ers go with Mac Jones. Kyle Pitts, for the betting odds out there, it's set at 5.5 overall. So will he be selected in the first 5 picks or after the first 5 picks? What does Atlanta do, followed by the Bengals? I mean, that has to be enticing for the Falcons to possibly go Justin Fields, right?
Yeah, the Falcons, I think, is where this draft starts because they can go in so many different directions, and they can go sort of the Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre route and try to take the heir apparent to Matt Ryan and not force him on the field early, although that's really difficult to do when you take a kid in the top 5 in the modern NFL. I find it hard to believe you're going to sit them for 2 years. I just can't. That's just not the way the modern game works. So that alone turns me toward they are either going to take the pick and it'll be Pitts at number 4, or they're going to trade out to a team that wants a quarterback who would take the quarterback, whether it would be Fields or Lance. So a lot of options there. But ultimately, I do not think Atlanta's going to take a quarterback for that reason. There's just too much pressure to get him on the field early, and there's no way. People can criticize Matt Ryan all they want, and obviously he's aging, but there's no way a rookie quarterback is going to be more equipped to play than Matt Ryan. So I don't know how you pick a kid at number 4 with the knowledge he's not even going to see the field for 2 years. So trade down or Kyle Pitts.
So you would go with under 5.5 with Kyle Pitts going to Atlanta if you had to bet?
Well, yeah, well, that's a good one. Because I think there's a lot of quarterback desperate teams, and I think a lot of people know just what I said and are looking to be going to trade up in that spot, and then all of a sudden the under turns into the over. So yeah, that's a really shaky proposition, but it would cost a lot to get up to 4. So ultimately, I do think people will understand they're playing chicken with the Falcons. The Falcons don't want a quarterback, and they'll take Pitts. So if you put a gun to my head, I would take the under there and say Pitts is going at 4.
Okay, and then to go to Justin Fields again for a second, he's at 3.5, which is interesting. You hear a lot of Mac Jones, and you agree to the 49ers at 3. Falcons, it seems like Kyle Pitts, but you just detailed it. It's murky waters. Justin Fields over 3.5 or under. I'm guessing you're going over based off what you just said, but I still want you to break that down if you can.
Yeah, I'm going over there, and I think the only reason it is 3.5 because there is some murkiness with the 49ers to most people, but I don't think there is any murkiness to the 49ers. I think they're going to take Mac Jones, and we'll see. Kyle Shanahan wouldn't be the first person to bluff people, but that's why they traded up. So unless something happens, and unless they just absolutely went to these second pro days and said, wow, these guys are better than we thought they were. And I'm talking about Fields or Lance. And really, I've heard Lance more than Fields for the 49ers. So I think that would be a real good bet to take the over because he's not going to go 3. I don't think.
The Bengals at 5 are interesting, and we can play a lot of what ifs or hypotheticals, but what if Kyle Pitts is still there at 5? Everyone is assuming Penei Sewell to go to Cincinnati. If Pitts is still there, any chance? Like, what are the Bengals doing, or is that an obvious one?
I think it should be obvious for all the reasons I said about the Eagles. I mean, look, they have Joe Burrow coming off, a former number 1 overall pick coming off a significant injury. I think that answers your question right there. If they're a smart football team. But they're not a smart football team. They have a history of not being a smart football team. Forget about Pitts as well. I mean, people want to see the reunion of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase as well. But they got to take the tackle. They got to protect the quarterback, and then you can build up around him. I think it's simple for them. And ultimately, I do think they'll be smart enough to understand that there's just too much value with a left tackle at the number 5 pick versus a tight end or versus a wide receiver.
So you have Miami at 6, the Lions at 7, Carolina at 8, with the possibility of having Fields and Lance still on the board. What is Miami going to do?
Well, if Miami has been talking about trading out again, and they've been going up and down and up and so forth, and we'll see what happens. Ultimately, if they like Jamar Chase, they'll take Jamar Chase. If they rate all 3 wide receivers sort of in the same category, they might consider moving out. Ultimately, though, they're looking for a playmaker. I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, to be honest. I'm headstrong. I don't see the value of these guys as high as they're going, and I'm talking about the skill position players. But ultimately, I think the Dolphins just take Chase and hope, cross their fingers that Tua. His struggles last year were more because of the injury, and just pray he's not a bust.
The Philadelphia Eagles to select an offensive player is minus 150. Is that a good bet? Do you see it being an offensive player regardless of where on the field?
No, I think it's more likely to be defensive. I think it's going to be J.C. Horn or an edge rusher, Kwity Paye, which I'm not allowed to say, according to Eagles fans. I'm not allowed to mention that name. I think it's more likely going to be a defensive player than an offensive player. And that's going to make a lot of people upset. But what might help the Eagles fans, not necessarily the Eagles, I think Kwity Paye might go 11th in the New York Giants. I think they might steal him away. He's not even in the conversation to be hated by the Philadelphia fan base.
Which wide receiver is selected first between Waddle and Smith? Smith is the slight betting favorite at minus 130. Jalen Waddle is plus 100. Who goes off the board first?
Yeah, that's kind of a flavor thing. What I've said pretty consistently is one of them is going to be there for the Eagles. One of them is going to be there. So I could see Smith going first. I could see Waddle going first. And that's, as Howie always likes to say, what's your favorite flavor? Most NFL personnel people I've spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a few over the past 2 weeks, would grade Waddle a little bit higher. But again, it only takes one team So if one team has Smith rated higher, well, then he's going to go, and then Waddle falls to the Eagles, or vice versa. So ultimately, if you're playing the odds, I think most teams value Waddle a little bit more. So I would have to say he would be the slight favorite there.
All right, one or two more for you here, John. Quarterbacks drafted in the first round, 5.5 over or under. And there's been some rumors that Kyle Trask could go late. Minnesota Vikings could grab a quarterback, whether it's Trask or Mills or Kellen Mond late. So what do you see there? We already know the 4 or 5 that seemingly are definitely going to go, but will there be a 6th, I think is the question.
You never know with 32. I think ultimately that would be the slot, and it could even be Tampa Bay because, I mean, they do have to think about the heir apparent to Tom Brady. And at 32 is a slot where you can take a quarterback and say, okay, you're going to sit for 2 years, and you're going to learn under the greatest quarterback of all time. That I could see. Or somebody trading up. You see it all the time. That's what happened with the Eagles when they won, and Baltimore came up at 32 to take Lamar Jackson. So because of the fifth-year option, there's always that chance. I do think if a sixth quarterback does go, it's going to be at 32, and I would say no. So I'm going to go under. Under, it's going to be 5, so I would take the under there. I just don't. Number 6 would be Kellen Mond. I just don't think he's worthy of being a first-round pick. I don't think you need to take him in the first round. And then the other guys you mentioned, Davis Mills, Kyle Trask. Yeah, I mean, the question on them is where are they going? Probably day 2, second round or third round. But I don't think they're threats at this point to go in the first round.
Last one here for you quickly. Najee Harris at running back. Which team, if any, is going to take him late in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard in the last few days that maybe Travis Etienne is the first running back now to come off the board. Or maybe nobody goes off the board in the first round. We all know running backs. Ultimately, I do think Najee Harris is the first to come off the board. I do think he'll be in the late 20s. And as far as fit, as far as team, I haven't really delved into that deep to the teams late in the draft, so I can't give him. I'm going to be doing my one and only mock draft early next week, so I'll have a better feel for that next week. But I do, from talking to personnel people, I do think he's going to go late 20s. And I think he's probably going to be the only running back that goes in the first round. And if for some reason Etienne jumps ahead of him, I think then Harris is going early second round. So either way, I think there's only going to be one running back going in the first 32 picks.
All right. Well, we'll get into the weekend here, and then we have 3 nights when we return to get our final thoughts in on the NFL draft coming up this Thursday night. John McMullen, every night at 7:30, our NFL Eagles Insider. Thanks, Johnny Mac. Have a great weekend, man.
You too, Ryan.
Yep, there he is. John McMullen.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.